No spoilies! No spoilies! Wongaka, what the heck is this? I thought this was supposed to be the Halloween episode.
What do you mean? Control has a certain creepy atmosphere, there's some weird monsters that you can sometimes be powerless against, there's the dreaded nightmare of bureaucracy.
I mean, fair enough on the bureaucracy front, but don't you think it's a bit of a stretch? Doesn't even the almighty Google list it as an action-adventure?
Yeah, but that classification is pretty meaningless. It's like if someone asked you, what do you want for dinner, and you just replied with the word food. Like, yeah, no shit, Sherlock.
Bitch, you know I don't eat.
Fine, it's like calling a genre of video games the video game genre. Does that please its majesty?
Nothing pleases its majesty.
Anyway, I know that Control isn't strictly speaking a horror game in the same way that Bioshock wasn't strictly speaking an RPG, or also a horror game, but it definitely has some plot themes and design that are not too far separated from such. What a person considers to be horror is after all very subjective. I mean, just look at Bloodborne as an example. It's not necessarily a horror game, but you could absolutely make a case that it fits into the genre, what with its monster design, story themes, general tone and atmosphere, and the fact that it basically takes place in London. What could be less unpleasant? This is why I want to talk about Control, because whilst it is part of the video game genre of video games, I think it leans enough into the horror camp that it could serve as a fine Spooky Month episode. Also because my anxious ass has kind of chickened out of playing Stranded Deep like I really wanted to, so you're getting Control. As in the game, not of your life. Your life is still going to be dedicated to the service of the almighty tool list and you're going to like it. So welcome my friends, enemies and various entities to another review on this odd little channel of mine. Today we travel back to the distant past of 2019 to talk about Control. We'll look at the mechanics, the themes, the hopes, the dreams, and maybe even figure out if it's worth going back to after 5 years. If you do end up liking this mess, then please consider giving the video a little thumbs up or subscribing for more of my rambling nonsense. Wow, I am so good at self-promotion. Anyway, let's begin with... The first thing that strikes me about Control is its visual style. It's going for a sort of photorealistic look, which I often find to be a bit trite, as it's been the go-to for many bland, uninspired games throughout the years. I should say though, it's not a bad style on its own, it's just way too overdone and often worn by games that are the equivalent of white noise. However, I think it was the right move for Control. Not only does the game look really good, aside from some awkward character animations during cutscenes and dialogue, but this realistic style serves the game well since it helps ground the game, adding a feeling of familiarity, so that when things go absolutely bonkers, it's a lot more noticeable. There is an immense amount of detail in the environment and on the character models. When we zoom into our protagonist's face, we can see all these little freckles and eyelashes, and a great detail is how her eyes don't stay still as she examines those she converses with. The entire game takes place within a single giant office building, and the fact that everything looks so lifelike really sells the location. I believe this is actually a place where people work, and I find that on its own this goes a long way into providing this feeling of discomfort. At first, it looks normal, like a real office where regular day-to-day jobs are done, but then you see the little things like the lights malfunctioning and the weird internal geometry. Combine that with the general absence of people and you've got a familiar space that feels quite wrong. The weird maze-like corridors feel almost randomly assembled, and then the smaller details like the completely brandless snacks within the vending machines, or the weird way the mundane items are contained in cages behind bulletproof glass. It all had me on edge from the moment I walked in the doors, and I don't think the illusion would work so well if the game went with a different art style. If you know me, you know I'm a big believer in the concept of art style trumping pure graphical quality, so the next line is going to feel weird to say, but I think the general high quality graphics are used well to better sell the idea that we're in a real place. I think in some form or manner we've all at least seen the inside of an office block before, right? Even if it's just on a TV show, we've got some understanding of what an office is and what to expect from one. They're usually not what one might describe as overly exciting places to witness. Heck, of all the ones I've seen in my life, they all had the same basic interior design philosophy. Minimalist furniture, the most uninspiring colours to be painted on a wall, the one supply closet that's just for crying in. So by emulating the real world, the game can better sell the subtle wrongness of where we are. But where are we exactly? Well, we happen to be at the Federal Bureau of Control, and whilst the story section will be where we dive into the more narrative aspects, because yeah, that's what the section's for, the summary is we are the director of a place that handles anomalies and basically covers up world events caused by them. Basically, take the SCP Foundation. Basically that. The game is a third-person action-adventure with most, if not all of the major challenges revolving around the gunplay and combat. For controls, we have the basic left stick to move, right stick to look, aim with R1, shoot with R2 sort of setup, but add to that you have circle to dodge, triangle to melee things, X to jump, and square to switch weapons. There's no reloading in Control. While you do have a gun and it does have ammo, the ammo regenerates over time so long as you're not firing it. If you have no ammo, then you have to rely on your supernatural abilities to get through combat, so let's have a look at those. You do have to unlock some of them, but here's what to expect. One of the first powers you get is a telekinesis throw, done with L2, that deals huge damage and can completely compromise an enemy shield. You get your own shield after a while that you activate with L1 that can block large amounts of damage, and then later you also unlock the ability to possess the minds of wounded enemies. You hold square when within range. Actually, I think you get those in the other order. You do also have to unlock the dodge ability, which is fairly early as well. I'm doing this all out of order. And you can levitate by holding the X button. Now, all of your powers, except for the levitation, which runs on its own weird timer, will drain a bit of energy, which, like ammo, recovers on its own after a time, so your response to a combat encounter is meant to be balanced between basic shooting and using your superpowers as your gun recharges. Your powers can be upgraded at checkpoints to increase the duration or add extra effects to them, like the levitation upgrades allow you to unlock a ground pound, which you can crack off by pressing R3 whilst in the air, or the one upgrade that triggers automatically when you drop your shield. It'll shoot outwards and damage enemies. Not gonna lie, that upgrade made me actually want to use the shield more. I do love turning my defense into offense. The powers are a great laugh to have a play around with, and honestly, so is the gun. I enjoy the combat a lot and really do appreciate how the game has tried to filter basic weapons that you might find in other shooters through its own style. First up, you only get one gun, but it takes multiple different forms. Pressing square swaps between two currently favorited forms, which you can swap out in the menu by pressing the touchpad, and whilst all forms do draw from the same ammo pool, they have different individual shot limits. For example, the machine gun form has the most shots it can potentially fire, whilst the high-powered sniper rifle form has the least, and you will need to swap between the various forms to best counter your enemies in combat, but you need to be wary because, again, they all draw from the same ammo pool. I do like the gimmick that the service weapon is all of your guns in one, explaining how Jesse can carry so many death-dealing tools without the use of a backpack, but that said, I do find some of the gun forms to be completely redundant or entirely forgettable. The default pistol being one, after you unlock the Pierce and Shatter forms, basically the sniper and shotgun versions, you probably won't need to use the default form anymore. It can't sharpshoot very well, and in close quarters you're better off with the Shatter form. The Spin or machine pistol form does so little damage that it's not even worth considering. You might think that such a tool is intended to deal with the large mobs of enemies that sometimes appear, but no, one-shotting enemies with it is hardly feasible with the low damage it outputs. It doesn't eat through shields any better than any other gun form does, and it runs dry so quickly. I know it's a fairly typical game convention that automatic gun does less damage per shot to balance things out, though I'd argue we should scrap that trope. I feel the actual balance comes from the fact that these things eat through ammo viciously, and begin to lose accuracy if constant fire is maintained. Control, as ammunition is not a concern since the bullets regenerate after enough time, doesn't really have the save up and salvo option. This gun is just completely not viable, considering if you run out of ammo with it, you're also out of ammo for your other guns. There was never a moment throughout the entire game when I thought the Spin was the most viable option, not when guns like the Scatter exist that can easily mop up groups of enemies like nobody's business. I seriously think it was intended as a shield degrading tool more than anything, but even if that was the case, it would be made redundant by one simple little fact, and that's that all weapon forms eat through shields effectively. Hell, the most efficient shield counter you have in your arsenal was the telekinesis power. Just throw the nearest desk at a shielded enemy and watch it disappear immediately, then just bully them with the shotgun, or the sniper. Or just throw another desk at them if you have the energy for it, because that's always fun. Later on in the game, you'll also find a pair of explosive weapon forms. I used both maybe twice and then never again because they were shockingly unreliable. All the guns can be upgraded, but by the time I got the explosive forms, whose names I can't remember as I typed the script, my Shatter and Pierce were already much more viable strategies for every combat encounter. Enemy mobs don't group up enough for you to catch them with splash damage, direct damage from projectiles and blasts is disturbingly low, and both of the explosive forms have about 3 shots before they need to recharge. Sure, that's one more than the Pierce has, but the difference is the Pierce is far more likely to actually kill the things it hits. I think it's fair to say that generally the game's combat is something I feel very on the fence about. Whoa, hold up Control fans, let me brew here. On the one hand, it can easily be quite a lot of fun. There's generally a good sense of feedback from the firearms to make them satisfying to play with, or at least from the two I favoured anyway, and our gal ain't a shit brick house, so surviving isn't about hiding behind a wall or tanking hits, it's about staying mobile and going on the offensive. Since enemies drop health pickups when defeated, it means it's a lot more viable to go on the offensive when you're low on health. But then again, maybe I'm just happy because I really don't like hiding behind a wall. Something else my long-time viewers will know about me is I really don't like cover-based shooting because I find it boring, and Control basically looked at that idea and said no, none of this, no, we're actually going to be about having fun, not hiding behind a collapsed bit of building waiting for your legs to grow back. You want your legs back? Well, sliver out there and take them from someone. On the other hand though, it feels so weirdly token. Like, don't get me wrong, it's a pretty good combat system, but it feels like it was only added because is a video game need shooty bang bang. Maybe the development team just didn't want to count on the game's story and setting to carry a player through, or maybe this genuinely was the vision from day one, which, I mean, fair I suppose. As fun as the fights can be, I feel like the game is at its best when you're not actively engaged in combat. I found that just exploring the maze-like offices of this TARDIS of a building where everything is normal enough at first glance but deeply weird below the surface was tense and kept me on edge. Now, I admit, I'm an anxious person by default, but there was a very real sense of dread I felt creeping up the papier-mâché I have in place of a spine, as I went from a well-lit office to a dark and creepy office where everything's just a little bit wrong. There was a great sense of ambiance to the entire adventure. There's a couple of enemies in the game that I really like because we specifically can't kill them with our guns. There's these distorted balls of stuff, I guess, which are invulnerable to our attacks, follow you quickly when they detect you, and will slowly kill your character in a way that looks fucking painful as the screen distorts and we hear what sounds like screaming, and our best hope is just to run away or trap them somewhere to make the area safe for us. Then there are these living nightmares that hide within the dark, a dark that drains your energy just for being within it, so to defeat them you can't shoot them, you have to utilise the light and your throwing abilities, tossing these batteries to conduits to create safe zones to move in. I genuinely love that sequence, and I find both to be rather unsettling. The thing in the dark was so long and gangly in the brief moments I could see it, and it could disappear entirely from view so long as they were in the suffocating darkness, so I want to spend as little time traversing that space as possible. And the scribbles are formless and unknowable. What are they? What do they want? I don't fully understand what I'm seeing, but it makes me uneasy because faceless, shape-based monsters are their own unique kind of horror creature that in recent years I've come to really appreciate. I don't know, there's just something much more disturbing about a monster that you can't put a proper face to. But then the game defaults back to third-person shooting, which again is fun, but sometimes it almost feels like it's from an entirely different game. Most enemies are just soldiers with regular-ass guns. I mean, there are a few interesting ones, like the invisible things you need to track through the way they displace their environment, or these hovering corpses that blow up if they get too close to you that you can start chain reactions with, but the rest of the time you're doing your shooting against regular looking dudes. In isolation, the combat is good. It tends to be the right balance of challenge and cathartic shooty bang bang fun times so I can enjoy it, but I find that entering a combat arena was the quickest way to completely demolish the tension the rest of the game was building up. Again, I'm an anxious pile of gender trash on a good day. I get unnerved walking through dimly lit offices contending with the confusing architecture and reading the various scattered documents which catalogue the unbelievable in a manner so mundane that says the people here have become so used to the weirdness that they don't even really consider it anymore. Everything about the presentation, from the plain furniture to the sterile walls to the excellent use of lighting, all contribute to this foreboding feeling I get. Whilst some people are alive in this building, there are plenty of offices that are just completely abandoned, which adds to this uncomfortable sense that something is about to happen soon, but I don't know what or how I'll deal with it. Then this feeling is immediately shattered when I walk into a room full of enemies because these are very immediate threats and I know exactly how to deal with them. 2 bullets to the head is usually enough. This is of course because Control isn't actually a horror game, it subscribes to the video game genre, but I do feel a trick was missed here to lean into the creepier aspects. Even the original Bioshock, that was a shooter at heart, managed to lean into its horror elements in a way that served the overall experience. Again though, I need to stress that I don't hate the combat system that Control has, it's quite good, I actually really enjoy engaging with it, I just can't escape the feeling that it only exists because violence is the primary avenue of which video games travel down to provide entertainment. I would say I get it because shooting things can be fun in a video game. Hell, it is fun in Control since the controls are responsive, and again there's a decent feedback to all your weapons and the various distortion effects the enemies have when destroyed are weirdly pleasing to experience. But then again, I sort of don't, because I mean I love murder as much as the next Brit, I'm sure that soundbite will never be taken out of context, but some of my favourite games are distinctly non-violent. But then again, I can admit that I can see why the mere act of exploring an office building might need something to spice things up for the less neurodivergent weirdos out there. I know I find it creepy, but then again I have an actual anxiety disorder, so it's not hard to keep me on edge. I've literally jumped at my own shadow more times than I care to mention, so maybe I'm injecting horror into a space where none was meant to exist at all. After all, what we find scary is no less subjective than what we find funny. And on the funny note, it could be argued that the game has a comedy element. As you explore, you'll find some interesting oddities, like one of the offices has been completely covered in yellow post-it notes which duplicated out of control due to proximity to an OOP, or Object of Power, which is what the FBC calls the mysterious objects that have unnatural powers. Stop me if that's too complicated. Or there's this refrigerator that needs to be watched at all times to appease its murderous intent. Again, I think I'm injecting horror into a space where it doesn't fully belong. Maybe I'm just desperate to justify this as my Halloween episode. But I suppose that one could make the case that the fact that the gunplay feels rather odd or even a bit unnecessary could actually add to the general oddness of the entire game. I know, it's an action-adventure, it needs action or else it wouldn't be worthy of such a vague title. I can't really be cross with a game doing a thing it wants to do, can I? Although speaking as a gamer, it's not like it would be the stupidest thing we've ever gotten upset about. I'm not saying any of if you lovely viewers do it, I'm sure you're wonderful. I'm just painfully aware that the capital G gamers are more than happy to throw a shit fit for the tiniest of reasons. Do y'all remember the pronouns guy who looked like he was on the verge of tears because Starfield offered pronoun options and then got mad because he thought a character in the game was trans when she wasn't? Or to use a more recent example, people were cross at Lara Croft's new chin design for reasons I can't even properly comprehend. Or to use an even more recent example of gamers being stupid, there was the whole thing about Silent Hill 2. There was that character in Silent Hill 2 who... Hold on. What were they cross about? Oh yeah, they didn't want to masturbate to her. I'm just saying the bar for gamers is pretty low. Ultimately, I do enjoy the gunplay, it is quite fun, I think the combat is generally quite good, even if there's a now smaller part of me that still wonders if it really needed to be there. Okay, cool, let's move on. As you explore the facility, which I should point out is called the Oldest House, and by the way, it happens to be an anomaly as well that the FBC just sort of based themselves in, you'll find some of these areas where the walls are all fucky and the lights are all red. Usually nearby you'll find one of these control points that upon cleansing will restore some of the room's architecture and now serve as a checkpoint. If you touch it, you'll heal, you can use it to fast travel and upgrade your skills, and also... craft. Yep, we've got crafting, and it's just as unnecessary here as crafting systems usually are. Cause why pace your game and have new weapons and traits be acquired through vigorous exploration or completing challenges when you can just load me down with junk and tell me to make it all myself? I do at least like the naming convention chosen to all the bits you're picking up. We're not finding screws or wood or scrap or lube, we're picking up corrupted samples and entropic echoes and the such. At least it's thematic, but I still dislike its inclusion because crafting is one of those features thrown into too many games regardless of whether or not it needs to be there. Yeah, it didn't need to be here. If the game did away with the crafting system and instead just let us find upgrades to our guns in the world, it would be a lot better. I mean, we can already find weapon mods throughout the game, which are different to upgrades because upgrades allow you to install more mods on your weapon. I mean, maybe they also increase the damage, I couldn't really tell. I'm just saying it doesn't feel like it would have been that hard to implement. On the subject of mods, both your service weapon and character, whose name is Jesse Faden by the way, probably should mention it at some point, have access to several items that once applied give them small bonuses like health or energy increases, greater damage or ammo capacity, which is fine, I suppose, although it does feel really faffy. What I mean is that following a combat encounter or after I've explored a few rooms, I need to open the menu and see what I've been hoovering up to make sure I don't have any tier 1 things equipped when I have tier 4 things available. And I need to dismantle any of the useless things I'm carrying to make room for more. It's something else that only feels like it's here because is a video game needs perks. But unlike the gunplay, this one isn't even fun, it's just tedious. I guess that much is weirdly thematic though. We have to examine what we're carrying, compare it to what we have, and then dispose of the unnecessary model. Kinda feels like I'm doing some sort of office job, so I can't blame it for being on brand. I can blame it for not being fun though. You're a video game after all, Control. Outside of some very specific instances, you should still be shooting for fun, or aiming to, at the very least, not bore me half to death. In any adventure, downtime is certainly important, but this ain't it fam, this is other games do it, so I gotta do it too. Anyhow, I want to pull away from this downward spiral of misery since the game is largely a good time, and I don't want anyone to walk away from my little lecture today thinking I had a bad time. Control has a lot of interesting things going for it. I particularly like these little motel sequences that sort of serve as entry points to certain departments or containment areas, which are anomalies themselves, serving as a puzzle-based lock to certain areas. It's an interesting idea. I mean, the puzzles are fairly simple, but I still quite like the sequences. I love the visual and sound effects used when entering the motel. What you do is you click this light switch 3 times and it transports you instantaneously, and I mean quite literally instantaneously, there's no loading screen whatsoever, to the motel where you need to solve a puzzle set across 3 rooms before you can proceed. I think I enjoy these bits because like with the main game world, something feels a bit off about this motel. It's very generic but intentionally so. It's almost as if the anomaly itself is mimicking motels well enough to get the details right to pass as one, but not so well that it stands out in any meaningful way. So an anomalous location that mimics a real world facility without fully grasping the subtleties? I sure do like this, and I only hope it is contained in a secure and protective manner. Honestly, I think the game presents these real feeling locales so well that I enjoy exploring the environments for the same reason that young me really enjoyed exploring San Andreas for hours in GTA, going to the places that real me couldn't and just existing in that world. There's something intriguing about just being in the Oldest House, following the odd layout around the mysterious corners whilst we learn about the lives of the people here and the methods in which they use to contain the objects of power. I also like that whilst the combat does have some teeth and a few shots will absolutely bury Jesse, the game is lenient enough to save your general progress before you're sent back to your last checkpoint. You don't need to reloot the area or regather the documents after you die. I know I was supposed to be moving away from the combat, but there are still some things I want to mention about it. I do think the combat strikes a good balance. There's enough resistance from the enemies that you do need to stay alert and be ready to respond at a moment's notice, but the game isn't so sadistic that it makes you completely redo everything leading up to your death. Also, I'd kick myself if I didn't bring up the final few combat elements that do genuinely annoy me. I've said my piece about the multiple weapon forms that are utter shite, but there are other problems. For example, these bulky levitating bullet sponge motherfuckers. They can go and eat shit. They have way too much health, do way too much damage, and because of the shield mechanic in that some enemies, a lot of enemies actually, have regenerating shields, it can be an utter chore to fight them. I did try to use explosive weapons against the really bulky dudes, but it just didn't do enough damage. They can kill you in 1 or 2 hits, and sure, Jesse isn't exactly a tank, so can't take a lot of damage anyway, but these guys are on a whole nother level. So much so that I went into the accessibility options and just decreased the damage I took because I couldn't be asked to deal with them properly. At least most of the enemies that do have a lot of health don't do too much damage. There are these bulky boos who lob timed grenades at you, which can hurt if they go off near you, but it's stupidly easy to fling them back. And then there are these Gatling gunners who have got to be the most useless soldiers I've ever encountered. I met several throughout the game and basically defeated each and every one of them just by stun locking them with basic attacks before they could even fire. Bad soldiers, wouldn't recommend, but that takes us to the end of the bile I have for the combat. It's still mostly good, even if it does start to appear a little bit weaker the longer you look at it. I do have a few other complaints. For instance, I do wish the game made more of a use of puzzle elements. It flirts with the idea a few times, but seems definitely afraid of commitment, so we don't have a whole lot, which for this kind of game just feels like a missed opportunity. I'd also prefer if the levitation power had some sort of visible meter for us to reference. I did quite enjoy playing Control at the end of the day though, despite some of the weird design choices, some mechanical bloat, looking your way crafting system. I'll be glad for the day the games industry largely takes you out behind the shed. But as I've said before though, I won't deny when I've had fun, and Control is quite fun. Even beyond just the shooting and desk eating, there is plenty to be impressed by. My favourite feature of the game world is how destructible the environment is. You can take cover in a firefight, but just know it's only going to be a temporary arrangement. Some bits of cover do take longer to break than others, and some just don't break at all, so you can find some more permanent safety, but so much of the environment can be destroyed and demolished. Watching the glass shatter and paperwork fly is just brilliant, and I love that the devs thought of this. This game is dripping in atmosphere and detail, and the gunplay, whilst a bit odd, is an absolute blast. Some enemies will wreck your shit in a handful of attacks, so you need to learn how to counter them effectively, and since to heal in battle you need to be pushing the attack, you're being rewarded as a player for the behaviour the game wants to encourage in you, and that's fantastic. I love it when a combat system is more dynamic than just sitting behind indestructible boulder number 3008 and waiting for all my limbs to grow back. I want to be proactive, you see. So whilst I do think the game might have missed a few opportunities and didn't always bring everything it could have brought to the table, the stuff that it did remember to bring was still rather good, at least as far as the gameplay is concerned. When the story is factored in, things shift a tad. So let's get into the plot side of this, I guess. Title card. To understand Control, we should first seek to understand its close friend Alt and her girlfriend Delete. No, wait, what I meant to say was, we should first seek to understand the SCP Foundation. If you lurk online or spend time near someone who does lurk on live, or if you're in active containment yourself, I see you anomalies out there, you are valid, then you probably have heard of the SCP Foundation, a sort of internet anthology series where people create anomalies and then upload them to the SCP site. The idea behind it is basically cataloguing the mythic, powerful, or otherwise unknowable in a cold, bureaucratic fashion, which I believe began with SCP-173, the statue, which is basically a nerfed version of a weeping angel from Doctor Who. It moves when it's unobserved, it's of indeterminate origin, it's quicker than you'd expect, all that good shit. Or maybe you've heard of SCP-682, the hard-to-destroy reptile with its fierce intellect, utter hatred of everything alive, and seeming inability to just fucking die already, despite the Foundation's numerous attempts to destroy it using weapons, acid, and other SCPs. Including the likes of SCP-096, the Shy Guy who will find, murder, and dispose of you if you have the misfortune of seeing any amount of its face. And that's if you see it in person or even in a photograph. Just 4 pixels of its face in a photograph is enough to send it into a murderous rage, and it will find you and destroy you. Once it's in a rage state, it's coming for you, and there's very little the SCP Foundation can do aside from slow it down a little bit. And there are so many other interesting SCPs out there, like the contagious crystal that slowly turns you into a crystal if you have the misfortune of touching it. There's a plague doctor that will kill you with a single touch. There's a little girl that turns everyone into a murderous psychopath if they spend more than 10 minutes around her. There is such a variety to the oddities in the Foundation files, and whilst some are less well written, it does feel like it's taken the Valve approach to content moderation, basically fuck all. But nevertheless, it's an interesting phenomenon and I really enjoy reading about it. Control definitely looked over the SCP wiki and did the old "can I copy your homework" thing, and the site was like, yeah sure, just make it look different enough so Miss Teacher doesn't notice. And don't worry, Miss Teacher definitely noticed, but she doesn't get paid enough to deal with this shit. So instead of the SCP Foundation, we're exploring the FBC, the Federal Bureau of Control, which is like the SCP Foundation, but I guess more exclusively American? Yeah, I mean, I guess that makes makes sense. We play as Jesse Faden, a fairly unremarkable looking protagonist who's been seeking out the FBC for many years after they abducted her brother Dylan when the pair were just children, after he and Jesse stumbled across an object of power in their hometown, a slide projector, which could basically project other worlds, or you could travel through it to other worlds. It's a bit convoluted. I will admit the objects of power that we encounter throughout the game are mostly just normal looking items, which is a bit of a shame, but then again I can also appreciate the idea that such things might hide in plain sight. Jesse has been searching for the FBC for years and have finally found them inside the oldest house, and it's not been easy since the HQ itself is, as I said, an anomaly. Basically it's got this whole you can't find it by accident, you've got to want to or really need to see it before you can see it sort of effect in order, alongside the convoluted internal layout. Upon entering, Jesse notices the lobby is empty, there's no one to welcome or direct her, so she engages in a brief bit of exploration that fairly quickly reveals that something has definitely gone terribly wrong. We do meet a janitor named Artie, who mistakes us for his new assistant, but there is something faintly off about the dude, mostly because he seems to be the only person we found so far in this big empty building. Either way, Jesse comments that she'd sooner trust the maintenance staff of a building than anyone wearing a suit. Fair. Eventually, Jesse finds her way to the office of the director, a man named Trench, who surely must have some answers, or at least he would have if he didn't come down with a nasty case of shot in the head with the surface weapon lying by his corpse. It's sort of suggested that he offed himself, though later there are some subtle hints that this may in fact not be the case, but then again I can't say for sure. We are after all in a building that shouldn't exist containing objects to defy logic. I think we just have to get used to the idea that things aren't going to make sense for a while. Jesse is guided to pick up the gun, though to be fair, this creepy building looks like trouble, so it's probably just best to have it than rather not have it, but it too is an object of power. It binds right to her and she becomes the new director. Something she seems at best to be slightly hesitant about, but the gun has chosen her and that's all the qualification she needs apparently. In other words, she's about as qualified to run things as any average CEO. Wow, even the FBC hiring process is weird, though Jesse just sort of goes along with it as if it isn't completely bonkers. Personally, when I enter a mysterious building and a gun binds to me, making me the leader of a shadowy group of people that contain anomalous objects of great power, I tend to have a few more responses, like how the fuck, and why the fuck, and seriously the fucking fuck. Gosh, don't you just hate it when you head to the office for a meeting and suddenly merge with a gun that makes you the commander-in-chief who needs to manage countless horrors? It was so inconvenient, that was like my 4th worst Valentine's Day. I didn't even work there. Anyway, Jesse Faden is now the director and it's up to her to sort out the mess the FBC is in. See, currently a supernatural force we call a Hiss is distorting the building and its workers, but Jesse has the ability to cleanse the Hiss-infected regions and bring them back to some semblance of normalcy. Doing so allows her to create these safe zones where surviving staff members can work to restore the functionality of the FBC. A rather neat little detail is that all the staff we managed to save have these devices on their chest that put out a sort of counter signal that wards off the Hiss, which immediately rose some alarm bells. It's clear that the maker of these things knew something was about to go down and did their best to provide as many of the HVAC thingies, I forget the acronym, and the chest things we'll call them, to the staff as they possibly could, though interestingly the builder is nowhere to be found. Once we cleanse the executive wing and make it safe for survivors, we meet Emily, who will sort of walk us through the basics of what went down and what we can do to fix it. We also learn that Jesse has this almost constant internal monologue going on whenever she's conversing with others. Jesse will often pause mid-conversation like she's light Yagami to have a long think, and I like to picture that she's actually taking several real drawn-out seconds to think and her conversation partner just has to stand there waiting, wondering if her brain broke. Have you ever seen those edits of Death Note where Light and Elle are sat in silence because the internal thoughts have been removed? It's a bit uncomfortable but also really funny, and I like to imagine that's what's going on here. Part of the reason though that Jessie does this whole talk to herself thing is so that she can confer with the entity inside her head, a being called Polaris, which basically serves as her real life video game waypoint to point her to where she needs to go. And as you can probably expect, currently being in a place that locks up weird shit makes her a bit hesitant to want to reveal this fact. I mean, Emily the executive seems friendly enough, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. For now, we agree to help however we can, which means going throughout the building and reconnecting the high-valued personnel and bringing them back to the executive wing, or if that won't work, securing their area so that they can do their jobs properly. This includes us binding with some more artifacts, stopping the building's power plant from melting down, tracking down a security bigwig who has information about Dylan, and eventually meeting up with the man himself. We do go down to his containment chamber because he was being held as if he was an anomaly himself, but he's already made his way up to the executive wing because he wants to talk to us, so we have to go back upstairs. And when we do get back up there, it's not exactly the most heartfelt reunion. When we do get to Dylan, it's revealed that he was brought to the FBC and groomed to become the next director, but he also tells us that if we want more answers, then we have to go to a containment chamber where a being called Hadron is currently housed. What he doesn't tell us though is that Hadron is actually what the FBC calls Polaris, and it's been contained here for some time and been reaching out to Jesse for years. It also reached out to Trench a few times apparently, and that's probably what allowed Jesse to eventually find this place. But when we do get down to that chamber, the Hiss has arrived, and then the credits roll. But wait, it's a fake out. When we reawaken, Jesse Jessie is now basically an intern for the FBC who needs to deliver mail and clean up the office, but if you do just start completing these objectives then you'll be trapped indefinitely. What you need to do is visit Trench to break the loop a few times before you're allowed to leave. At this point, Dylan will take off with the slide projector as apparently he's been working with the Hiss from minute 1 and it's why it was able to invade in the first place. So now we have to find the slide projector, which is siding somewhere else in the building. We go inside the little realm that it creates, within which we can find Dylan, we fight our way to him, then we grab him, and that's where the story ends. Yeah, just sort of cuts out, the credits play, and that's it, that's the end of the game. Yeah, I'm gonna be real, there's still a lot of unanswered questions here, and not in a cool ooh mystery sort of way, more in a we forgot to write a fucking ending way. I hear the Foundation DLC pack fixes this, but I personally won't be giving the game any points for it. DLCs that contain the rest of the fucking story aren't necessarily a bad thing, depending on how narrative focused the game is or how it chooses to deliver its plot. I mean, take Dark Souls 3 for example, its DLC added hugely to the world and lore, painting a better picture of the universe, but the base game still had a coherent plot if you were paying attention. All the Ashes of Ariandel or Ring City did was provide extra helpings of the game, but the base game itself was perfectly enjoyable without either of them. Or for a better example, let's look at Fallout New Vegas, where all of its DLC packs were additive. Sure, the main game world could be slightly affected by the DLCs, but without them you still get a coherent, thoroughly interesting and very enjoyable plot because even the famously crunched New Vegas team knew that they had to finish the story they were writing. Control very much felt like the story just wasn't finished in time, but the game had to ship anyway. There is a fairly involved story with some optional quests that expand upon the lore of the world and allow us to engage with more characters, but a lot of it just falls off after a while. Characters like Emily or the security gal or this one containment boy we meet at one point don't really play a role in the final act. It's not helped by the fact that the game's story isn't as convoluted as it is. Unless you watch all the TVs you find around the map, listen to all the audio logs or read all the documents, and there's a solid chance that you'll have missed 50% of the info you needed to get the best grasp of what's going on. Let me put it this way, at the very end when the credits rolled for a second time, I thought it would be another fake out because clearly there was still a lot to sort out, but no, that was just the end. We entered the slide projector, saved Dylan, and that was that. I feel quite bitter about it because Control should have been a storytelling treasure trove, and it often was. Again, there are so many documents and files that build the world, tell the stories of the staff and contain objects, but maybe that was part of the problem and the team should have focused on the main plot. Again, maybe the DLC answers some questions, but I'm firmly of the belief that the story shouldn't need a fucking add-on just to be completed, and it did sour things for me towards the end. I had so many questions. Who or what was Artie the janitor? Was there a permanent solution to the Hiss? Can we salvage our relationship with Dylan, who largely thinks Jessie abandoned him when he was left in the hands of the morally dubious government agency, that whilst might have a noble stated goal, it's still a government organisation and therefore is not to be blindly trusted. But at the end I realised that none of it would be answered because fuck me, I suppose. In my humble opinion, you should finish the fucking story of your game in the game itself, don't just sell us the rest of it to make a few extra quid. By the title, I'm more bitter than I realised. I will say the story is not a complete lost cause. The game world builds just fine and it does give us a good sense of who the characters are as people. Emily is a bit energetic, perky and generally good natured. The security lass is hard boiled and focused on the most necessary tasks, even saying to us, the director, that she will help us with our personal quests just as soon as we do our job and get the Hiss under some modicum of control, and I can't fault that. That would absolutely be her priority right now. Even Jessie herself understands this and responds rather positively. The containment boy is burned out in a way that only someone tasked with playing babysitter to powerful world-changing entities could be, yet still tries to be relatively upbeat even though he looks like he's constantly running on fumes. But there is something more to all the staff we meet, and that's generally how they respond to Jessie. Jessie isn't hailed as some great hero who will right the wrongs of the world. She's the director, sure, and she's a useful asset, but she's not about to get a standing ovation for it. She is shown respect and offered praise when she goes above and beyond, but her subordinates, whilst they are impressed with her actions to a degree, don't seem all that concerned about her in the grand scheme of things. The paranormal is normal to them. Mysterious forces and all-powerful entities are the status quo, and we're in their world where even our connection with an entity isn't much to write home about. It's mostly just looked at in the context of how it helps her do her job. There's almost a cynicism to the FBC staff. After all, this is their reality. This is what they used to. It might be weird and new to us, but it's definitely not the case for them. I do wish Jessie had more of a reaction to the nuttily butterly shit she deals with. She mostly just faces it all with the same blank expression, and more often than not, she's the weakest element in any scene that she's in. Again, her voice actor is fine. I think it's probably a directing problem, but she rarely has any proper human reaction to anything that's going on. She just sort of flows through it like it's all fairly normal to her. Maybe it's meant to solidify that she's actually the perfect person for the director job, as she takes it all in her stride, but I think the game missed a chance to have a character actually reacting to the utterly bizarre stuff in a way that we can find relatable? Or is this perhaps a comment on the wider gaming audience, that we as players are probably so used to the tricks and traps of the industry that things that once delighted and amazed are so commonplace to us now? Does Jessie then represent our own disenchantment as gamers, our own accepting of the strange as if it were mundane? Or am I giving Control too much credit here? I think I could sum up the story of Control as a sort of 50-50 situation. Half of it feels interesting, well thought out, well written and well executed, but the other half feels like it was phoned in, half-assed, and like the writers just really wanted to go home. Control is an odd duck. I like it mechanically for the most part, even if there's that voice in the back of my mind telling me that the fun gunplay feels like it was only added just cause, and the story, whilst it had some competence to it, failed to stick the landing so hard that they made Air France look like they knew what they're doing. I don't even dislike Jessie as a character. She's capable and determined, her voice actor is pretty decent, and I think the character designers managed to score the right balance of making her look good without standing out too much from a crowd. The game has a lot of potential, some of it I'd argue it even reached, but an almost equal amount of it just didn't. Some of the elements that were quite interesting, like the all-consuming darkness, never showed up again, and over half of your gun forms were utterly disposable, and I can't even remember what half the enemies looked like. Still, I can't say that I hate the game. It would have to be a truly abhorrent piece of shit that actively preys on its user base for me to go that far. Cough raid. But is it worth playing now? That's the million-pound question. Well, the Enhanced or Ultimate Edition maybe, since it contains the real ending and I managed to grab it for like a $5 on sale, but if you're like me, you might look at a game that relied on its DLC to finish its main story and think that your time might be better served with games that actually finish their assignments before handing it in. I don't know, maybe? I wish I could offer you a more concrete answer to the question, I truly do. It's just that after a certain point I was playing more for the sake of the video than I was for fun, and it's hard to recommend a game that was starting to feel like work after a while, and then had the audacity to have a shit ending that sort of soured the whole thing, but it was also kind of fun to play still. It's not the worst game I've ever played, not in a world of shitty asset flips and Borderlands, but if, say, it had released in 2024, it probably wouldn't be on my Game of the Year list either. Something I probably won't be doing yet again this year since, well, you've seen my output, I think. Have you? Are you there? Am I? What day is it? Where am I? Anyway, that'll do it for us. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please do the YouTube things if that was the case. And here's hoping that there's not another random several seconds of black screen just hovering somewhere in the video like there was with the Solstice review. Still not entirely sure why that happened, but it happened and I'm trying to make sure it doesn't happen again. With everything sorted though, I'll let you get on with the rest of your Halloween. So take it easy my loves, enjoy the sweets that this time of year justifies consuming, watch some good horror flicks, maybe play a good spooky game. Do all the Halloween stuff, you've earned it. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.